He's angry about mortgages. It's Angry Mortgage. He's swearing. He's cursing loud. He's old. He's opinionated. And he's been doing this so damn long. This program is about mortgages, and this is mortgage advice, but the advice may not apply to your situation. Contact licensed mortgage professionals for specific recommendations before you make decisions about mortgages. You may not agree with Ron, but if you don't, he thinks you're wrong. Oh, and did we say there is a lot of swearing?
We are back, and more, because I love this topic. So we're going to take another dive into non-bank lending, into the other side of lending particularly in Ontario, but in Canada, it all works the same in every province. Although, is it fair to say, like, Ontario is a hotbed for this private sort of MIC lending, right?
Yes, for sure.
Let me introduce my guest. Like last week, we had Nick Cipriano, just a super duper great private lending mortgage investment corp operator. Really, I've known Nick for years. I've known Derek for years.
Yep.
A dear friend who is going to talk about the entire opposite side of private lending from what Nick Cipriano does, and it's just as interesting. I think people are going to find it. We figured out some trends that are kind of interesting that are going to be worth talking about. But
I agree.
Derek runs Westboro MIC, Westboro Mortgage Investment Corp. And if you've just been fucking shooting the lights out since you got there, really. I think that's fair to say.
It's been a good run. Yeah, it's been 4 years, and it's been a really good run.
So I'll just say it right off the bat because, Mortgage Investment Corp is where people can invest their money. So Nick pointed out that he had a super successful DRIP program. I'm not going to bore everybody with all this stuff, but I got to say this. Derek's distribution to his investors at his corporation is quite fucking impressive. I'll just say that. I think you've been in the nines the last multiple quarters, right? You've been in the 9% range?
We have. Yeah, we've been able to hold at, call it 75 basis points a month or 9. And even through like the last 7 Government of Canada rate cuts.
Wow. Because those rate cuts do have a distinct influence on private lending.
Yes.
That's the way it works. Just to explain it, folks, in the private lending world, the investors look at what they can get. I think it's fair to say what they can get that's better than a bank GIC. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. A fixed income solution.
A fixed income solution. So when a bank GIC was 5.5, there was probably a few less investors running around. Is that fair to say?
It is.
Okay. But now that the bank GIC is down to 2.95, whatever the heck it is that about right? I don't keep track of it.
Yep.
But as a private lender, as a MIC, you're paying your investors a distribution, and if you can consistently keep a number with a 9 in front of it, you're going to be pretty fucking famous. Okay, I think that's reasonable to say.
Listen, I think that many have had to reduce their return, and I would imagine at some point we will as well, just given the environment. But we certainly, strive to provide a return, a risk-weighted return. So certainly that's the portfolio is one that can return something that's doesn't have a ton of risk to it, and also a little better than what our competitors are returning.
Right. Look, I got to quickly jump in with a sort of a standard warning. When we talk about investments, which we actually are not fucking licensed to do investments. You don't have an investment license. I don't have an investment license. But we're not really here to promote investments. What we have to talk about, if we're going to talk about private lending or non-bank lending, we have to talk about the other side of the equation, who are the people who are putting the money in, okay? Because it is those two things. It is matching borrowers to investors. Because if you don't have enough money, you can't lend, right?
Exactly.
And if you have too much money, your distributions can't keep up. Is that also fair to say?
Exactly right.
But we're not recommending investments here. We are not licensed to do that, so we're not doing it. We are simply providers of information. Okay.
Absolutely.
And but we can't, because we have over our years, because you're a lot younger than me, but still, you've been doing. When did you start in banking? When did you start? How many years ago?
1994.
Sweet Jesus. Yeah, you're 30 years in, man.
Is that let's do the math. Yeah. 30, yeah. Long time ago.
Jesus.
And that still makes me younger than you, though.
Fuck yeah, you were younger than me for sure.
Good.
100% younger than me. Yeah, like I'm as the oldest guy around. Like I got, I'm on the pension, for fuck's sakes. Okay. Like I am. I didn't postpone my pension. You always hear about financial planners talk about you want to postpone your pension.
Yeah.
But when you weigh 320 fucking pounds, you don't postpone your pension. You take it early. Okay.
Give me the cash flow now, baby.
Well, no, but I know what a mortality table looks like. Okay. Like I know, like if you're like a stick man and you're like a super healthy guy running half marathon when you're 68, then yeah, fine. Don't take your pension. But with me, yeah, I got to maximize that fucker, okay? Because I only have a limited time to get it, all right? So, yeah, I'm on the pension. Simple as that. All right, so the really interesting part I find with Derek's work is you run Nick last week talked about just this extreme cookie cutter portfolio, that it's just a house on a normal street, on a regular neighborhood that looks like all the other houses. And there's a ton of things he doesn't do. And there's a bunch of things you don't do either. Okay. Yep. Like every well-operated mortgage investment corporation has a list of things they will not touch. Fair?
Fair.
Yeah. And in this case, you do things that are totally, in some ways, the opposite of what RiverRock does, in that you have a large construction portfolio. We're just going to talk about that for a few minutes. What percentage of your business do you think is construction?
20%.
20%?
Yeah, maybe okay. At the peak, like once the draws come through and the summer comes in, we would be maybe to a maximum of 20%. And then once the houses start to sell and the pay downs come in, we'd trend down to maybe 10 or 12.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because we're going to talk about how that actual way to do construction lending actually works. Okay, so I came up with a theory when we were speaking earlier that construction applications, I think, which is individual human beings wanting to build their own home, I think those applications are actually up. And do you think they're up?
I love when you start a sentence with, I came up with a theory.
Yeah, I came up with a theory. I did. I came up with a theory.
You're right. Yeah. And they are. Yeah. The theory is just, in my mind anyway.
So my theory, even because I'm sure as fuck not an economist, okay? Like I'm nothing like Tiff, that's for sure, Tiff Macklem, the Bank of Canada governor, or our new prime minister, who is an economist.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm definitely nothing like those two gentlemen at all, okay? In fact, I'm so different from them, I would be fine with the idea that they both left their jobs soon. But that's just me, okay? The prime minister's in for a while. He's got a couple of years minimum, so we're just gonna live with that. But not an economist, but I'm somebody who talks to the public, and my company's got a bunch of people talking to the public all day long. And strangely, there's this appetite for people to want to build their own homes. They're good people. Our applicants seem to be pretty good. Derek, do you think that's got something to do with the fact that none of the construction companies are building new homes anymore? Because we both recognize there's a complete drought of new residential low-rise, like single-family home construction in Ontario. It's just a drought, right?
Yep. Yeah, I do. I think that there's always consequences, sometimes intended, sometimes unintended, based on major shifts in the market. And so, maybe pre-COVID, during COVID, when houses were booming and people were buying, the builders were building, and it's stopped. And so I don't think that stops the average Canadian who wants to have a new home from coming up with ways to make it happen. And so, we've seen this uptick for sure in terms of clients who are saying, I'd like to build my own home. I've bought a piece of land or I've bought a tear down. Those are kind of two different things depending where you are.
Yep, very different. Yeah.
The tear down's kind of a GTA thing because there isn't a heck of a lot of land. And obviously when you get outside, closer to London, closer to Barrie and
Ottawa,
Kingston to Ottawa,
yep,
there's land. And so, but the clients are, they've got a vision for what they want to live in. And if it's not being built for them, then they've got all the resources and capability to build their own home. And part of the kicker is when you're buying pre-construction, the financing's pretty easy. The house is built. You go to the bank, you get your pre-approval, you buy the house.
Yeah.
Very simple. If the house isn't built yet, but you have a vision for what you want it to look like, that's where the broker world becomes very important and valuable because the advice piece has to kick in terms of where can I get construction financing, who's good at it, and how do we make it as easy as possible for you to execute, at least on the financing side of the build.
Yeah, and which is really the crucial element. I mean, although as you and I have both come to realize, building a house is not as easy as 99% of the people who started doing it think it is. It's
100%.
just not as
easy.
There's literally, so for all the construction mortgages I've done in my 30 years to help people finish building the house they want, in the last few years, I've asked people at the end of the process, I said, would you do this again? Would you build your own house again? And there's the answer is universally the same. Yeah, it was really interesting. I learned a lot. It is probably the house that I want. It gives me joy to know it's the house that I want. It is so fucking hard. I nearly drove myself crazy. My wife nearly left me. It's so fucking hard. Yes, it's hard. Okay, yeah. So we all need to give credit to the Madamies of the world, okay, who have this system in place and the right skill set and the right concept, and they can roll these houses out. Not now. There's fuck all being built now, okay, but in Ontario anyway, and pretty much British Columbia, fuck all nothing, okay. But it's hard. It's hard when you're sort of doing it all on your own. It's very hard. But I think that there's a bunch of people like, it's not you and me. Like, I don't think you and I ever gave a shit about building our own home, right?
No.
Nope. No interest. But it's like a genetic trait. There's some people who have a vision to build their own home. Or some people have a vision to only have a new home. They want a new home that's sparkling fresh and they get a blank canvas. And because we're not building any homes in Ontario at all, like, I know there's going to be a couple of comments. People are going to go in the comments and say, well, I'm in Kingston and there's a place where they're building 30 homes, so you're fucking wrong, okay? Like, please fuck yourself, okay? There's nothing, the stats. You see it. We're involved.
Yep.
There's no new homes getting built per se. There's just compared with normal, it's nothing.
It's nothing. It's definitely slowed. And I think there's a variety of things, right? Like, there could be the idea that I want something custom or I want it new, or even like when you're looking at doing renovations these days, right? It's so expensive. Like, I need an extra bedroom. I want an extra bathroom. I want to build the house so that I can accommodate having my parents living with me. And to do that to my house, it's going to cost me $400,000. And so I might as well just sell my house and build a new one. And so there's all kinds of things that happen through the life cycles of a Canadian where they say, you know what, I want something new. And if I can't buy it, I'll build it myself. And that's where we come in.
Yeah. Now, Derek was previously with RBC, and he did a friggin' fantastic job at RBC too. But the banks do construction; they do help individual people build houses, but it's just a little too strict. Is that a fair statement? Yeah,
and I would say that all the banks, not just RBC, they're all kind of in the same boat in that they do really well with products that they scale. And so they can churn mortgages all day long.
And they do.
And they do a really great job of it. But construction is a boutique product. It's a custom product. And,
by hand.
Yeah. And sometimes the bigger the lender, the tougher it is for them to shift and pivot into the smaller boutique-y kind of lending pieces. And so they don't have as many experts in construction. They don't have as many underwriters, because ultimately, as much as you're talking to the broker about doing construction, it's the underwriter you're going to be working with for the next 18 months or so until the build is done. And if that underwriter does one construction deal a month, they're not going to remember all the processes, and they're not going to look out for all the different kind of things that they need to look out for in terms of the draws and the timing and all the rest of it, and give you advice where you need it. Whereas if you're working with an underwriter who's managing a portfolio of 8, 10, 12 construction, and they constantly have them on the go, they are an expert at construction lending. And so they will be able to provide the broker or the end client the right kind of advice, the right kind of hand-holding that in some cases are required. Because to your earlier point, everything rarely goes exactly to plan. It's not to say it can't, but for some reason, and in some cases, it's even weather related. Like, you're talking about getting a build, like think of this year, getting a build going in January, and then we get lambasted with more snow than I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And then after the snow comes the ice storm. Then after the ice storm comes the cleanup. Like, when are you going to get that build going? It might have been delayed, not for lack of the builder being ready to go, or the contractor, not for lack of money, because the weather is going to dictate to a certain degree the build in the spring.
Exactly. It's a great point you make about expertise. And I try to touch on it as often as I can. Like, there's a reason that Canada has to spend $7 to $10 billion to build one icebreaker for the North. And the Chinese can do it for like $800 million a copy. Okay, no problem. And lots of them, as many as you want, on time, on budget. Because if you're not building enough ships, you don't fucking know how to build ships. That's reality. Same with any sort of underwriting work, any kind of mortgage work. If you only do 10 mortgages a year or worse, 4 mortgages a year, you barely understand how mortgages work. I always feel that people are better off working with busy people, like, work with people who are professionals, who are busy, who you can tell they're busy, who you can tell that they're doing a lot of mortgages. Just like I think that's the reason why people go back to big realtor teams, is they know somebody knows how to buy and sell houses, right?
But we deal with a lot of brokers across the province, and I'll tell you, the ones that are the best to deal with are the busiest ones.
Yeah.
Those top producing folks whose names are everywhere. I'm never waiting for them for an email, never waiting on them for a call back. So that's something I've always believed, is find me someone who's well known, who's been in the business a while, and you will find someone who gets back to you right away, and almost with no reason why they can't. And so they just come up with a way to make it work.
And they have the answers.
They
have answers, and they can tell the client before they send a single application to any bank or to any lender like Derek. They know where the fit is. They don't send it to 7 people. They don't send it to 7 different organizations and hope for the best. They know where that client fits.
Yep.
And that's a tremendous advantage. So let's just, for the sake of the audience, let's just break down basics of how construction mortgages work. And I think, we do a little bit, you do a ton. Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say that you got to have some money up front to get this thing going?
Definitely.
So the matrix that I'm familiar with is that you better own the land free and clear, whatever land it is, whether you bought an infill lot, you want to tear down some old rickety house, or whether you bought some land in the Ottawa Valley and you want to raw land. It's just, but you better have it. You better have it free and clear. In other words, you paid cash for the land. You better have all the permits, all the plans. You better have the building permits. You better have every single little tiny thing signed off from the city. We refer to that as soft costs in our business. And you maybe even better be prepared to dig the hole.
Yep.
With your own money before any of the construction financing kicks in. Is that about the same for you, or how do you approach it?
Same approach. Yeah, definitely. So again, as much as maybe lots of people would like to have a new home and build their new home. Ultimately, it is a project for folks who have money or access to money up front and their own money. And so once they get kind of it's about 15% complete by the time the hole is dug, the foundation is poured, all of those other soft costs are paid for. And then we also have a comfort that the build is going to happen. Because, there are days gone by when people were saying, can you finance this piece of land? And I think other companies, considered doing that. We never did. And then all of a sudden, when you start looking into the permits and you start looking into these other things, it's like, wow, I didn't expect this to take so long or be so expensive. And then the next thing you know, it's like, well, I'm not sure if I can fulfill on the build. And it's like, well, we have this mortgage on this piece of land. Now what? And so those days don't apply at Westboro, but ultimately yes. And so even for folks who have a lot of equity in their current property, whether they have a big HELOC that they can access, or I was saying to you before, my favorite clients are the clients who they've sold their home and they've moved in with their in-laws, and those are the people who guaranteed will be the quickest build in and out because they are ready to go, and everybody's got skin in the game to get them back in that house.
Yeah, so. I mean, when Derek first mentioned that, I thought, fuck me, that is exactly what you want. Yeah. Okay, you want somebody who has got lots of money from selling their house, they're flush with cash, and Jesus, they got a timeline, okay? Because every day spent with the mother-in-law is torture. Okay?
There you go.
And so we got to get. And for all you mother-in-laws out there, I'm trying not to be too hard on you, but you know what you're like, really. Anyway, the point is that timelines are really the tough part about construction, right? So just to quickly fill in, so we've got a pattern we follow with construction that you would have all this done up front, all the paperwork done, all the permits, all the inspections. You would have the hole dug, the forms are poured, everything's ready to go. You're just about ready to actually build the house. And then we'll give you some money, you'll give money, I'll give money, and then we expect you to get the house fully enclosed. Is that your first phase as well?
Yeah, it depends. Like I'd say that we've really kind of customized a whole map so that the broker that's involved can share this with the client. And it's client friendly. It's broker friendly, but also client friendly. We evolved that a few years ago because, again, if you're a mortgage broker and you haven't done a lot of construction, you're going to come to Westboro because we're the experts. It doesn't mean you're the expert. Mm-hmm. So you might need to learn along the way. And so we've really kind of tailored everything, all of the things that are available on our website. But one of the key pieces to it is the budget. And, generally a builder will the client will have their budget. It might be on the back of a napkin. The builder will have a bit more of a formal budget. And then we look for the client to complete our budget. And that budget will align with what are things going to cost and what are the timelines of all those things. The nice thing about Westboro compared to a bank is we offer unlimited draws. And so a bank might say,
draws when you get money, folks.
When you ask us for money. So a bank might say, this is all well and good, but until you are 30% complete, which is, we will deem you to be 30% complete when an appraiser goes out and says you're 30% complete. We will then allow you X amount of dollars. At Westboro, you have a bit more flexibility to say, we're not looking to see how far along you are. We're looking to see what is the end kind of value and back that backwards to where you are complete and give you whatever money you're eligible to draw at your convenience. And certainly the private lending construction mortgage is more expensive than a bank.
Of course.
No doubt about it. But my question and my comment to everyone who kind of says, wow, this is a bit more expensive, I kind of say to them, for the next 12 or 18 months of your life, while you're building, the most important thing to you is going to be access to capital, not necessarily the cost of capital. And in some cases, what we've seen is when people prioritize the cost of capital, they wind up actually spending more money because they start the build with a construction mortgage at either one of the banks or one of the B lenders, and they very quickly find out they can't get access to the money. And so now you've paid kind of fees to go to that lender, and now you have to shift and go to another lender, which is obviously going to cost time and money. And if they had come to us right away, they'd probably be further along on the build. And so I think that when you're building, everything is a cost, and you're not going to pick the plumber or the electrician based on how cheap they are. You're going to pick them likely for the quality that they bring and the reputation that they have. And one of the great things about Westboro is, and it predates me. I mean, Westboro has been a strong construction lender for over 20 years, and the difference is when we used to lend just in Ottawa in kind of Kingston Valley, now we take it right across the province. But it's we have a recipe that works, and it's certainly going to be a little more expensive than a bank, but you're going to be dealing with experts who know what they're doing.
Yeah, and and to what you said, there's a whole bunch of other things we're going to touch on a little bit later about pitfalls that can happen when you're involved in private lending. But just to sum up, you do have to make progress. In other words, you have to be busily completing your home. And I think you get the money in phases as you complete things, which makes sense. And sometimes it's interesting. People who are trying to do it for the first time, they don't realize that you can get that house completely up. You can get a roof on, doors on, windows on. You can get your siding or your brick on or whatever you're doing for the outside. You can get a fully enclosed house. And if you're standing from the outside, it looks good, okay? But Derek and I will tell you, the stuff on the inside is more expensive and more complicated than the stuff on the outside. And it's amazing what people end up spending. And by the way, that's when the waiting is. Like if you end up having to wait for something, it's going to be about a backsplash that never shows up.
Yep.
It's going to be about a plumber who never gets the rough-in done on time. There's a lot that can happen and go wrong. So I think to sum up construction, it seems to be more popular. And by the way, folks, when we say that, we're kind of talking about it going from 2.5%, maybe 3% of mortgages to 4.5%. So it's still a very, very small segment of the mortgage business. But it does seem to be getting popular all of a sudden. And one thing that I think we know for sure is it will always take longer than you think. Fair?
Fair.
Every single time. Like what 5% finish on time? Maybe.
Maybe. And it's funny. Everybody's an expert. Like, everybody's brother-in-law and father-in-law. They're like, oh, you should do. So just like a little funny example would be someone says, well, I'm going to finish my basement first and then I'm going to work my way up. And it's like, well, it doesn't work that way.
At all. No, not at all.
Or I'm going to buy a kitchen and I'm going to put it in my father-in-law's garage and let it sit there. And I want you to lend me the money for it, even though it's not installed.
Yeah, no.
Because I got it for a deal. Yeah. And my father-in-law thought it was a good idea. No, it doesn't work like that. So the nice thing is everything's mapped out to be read and understood. And we've even built like a do and don't for clients that they can kind of read through. And I think it just kind of shines a light on all the pieces that are needed. And I think even if it gets a little busier, it will still be a very small portion of the overall mortgage industry for sure.
Yeah, because it's demanding and it's hard. And as in terms of nobody ever finishing on time, did anybody ever finish on budget?
Rarely.
Rarely. Like it's 95% over budget. That's fair.
It's funny where the hiccups go too. It's you'd think that people are going to be, when you're looking at the budget, it's like, wow, they've accounted for everything. And then all of a sudden it just starts to turn in terms of appliances and turn in terms of kitchens and countertops and kitchens and bathrooms, right? That's what sell houses. Well, if you're going to have a little bit of a luxury home or you're building something for yourself, that's where money can kind of get spent beyond what you thought it would be at the budget stage.
So to sum up on construction mortgage lending for individuals, for the sake of the audience, it is I'll just finish with what every single person who we've ever helped build a home says. At the end of it, I asked them, I said, what did you think of the experience? And they all say the same thing. Oh, it was really rewarding. I learned a lot. We have ended up with a home that, really does suit us. And it's way too fucking hard. Okay, I will never do this again. Never. I will not do this again. It was too hard, too many sleepless nights, too many phone calls, too many rushing over to look, too many things I didn't understand. I'll never do it again, but it was good.
Yeah.
It's about what we get.
And I flipped you, Annie. Like I love to hear, you wouldn't always think this, but I get I get emails from our customers like on a regular basis just saying, thank you for helping us because you've helped us, whether it be for a variety of reasons. But the construction ones are always great because they always have a bit of a story to go with them.
Always.
And anyway, yeah, I think people are always very appreciative at the end to say to everyone who helped them on their journey because they ultimately ended up with their dream home. And that's a pretty neat accomplishment that not everyone will always have. So,
and let's just to finish off, when Derek talks about that, having a very defined roadmap and have somebody who can answer every question and have somebody who can act as a Sherpa guide to get you to the end stages. I'm going to tell you this, that is not highly available out there. So there's a big benefit to having a lender. And people might say, oh, it's all about the contractor. Yes, contractor, very, very important. Trades, very important. People who are giving you the money, very important. Very important. So we'll keep that in mind. So let's talk about the whole state of the private lending business. I refer to it as private lending. We talk about it as alternate lending. It's essentially non-financial institution lending. Let's just call it that. There's a provincial regulator, but there's not a bank regulator. And it's every one of these. So we just discussed this earlier. Everybody's situation is totally different. So what are you seeing today that you are seeing that's new and different for you in the last 6 months?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think when I started with Westboro, it was very much all the things you'd think about with private lending. So speed is needed, and so we can close very quickly, so people are coming to us. Short-term solutions, and so we're in the middle of all that. People who are going through kind of like a change in their job, a change in their marital status, all the things that you would expect. Someone's died and they need short-term money, all the reasons people would come to a private, and we did all that and very successfully. But in the last, say, 6 months, year, it's been a little bit of a different view. Those transactions still exist. We're still seeing them. But now we're starting to see clients who are behind on their mortgages with other lenders. We're starting to see people who are coming up for renewal at other privates where they took a first and second mortgage, being a bundle a year ago, and now they're coming up for renewal, and there's kind of shock and awe in terms of what's transpiring. And we're also seeing a little softening in some of the industries from the job market, and that's also putting a little bit of stress on people who they're up for renewal elsewhere and they need more money, as usually people do at renewal. They kind of reassess their finances and say, this might be a good time to leverage the equity in my home. The only difference this time around is there isn't as much equity as there was.
Or there's none. Like if they're I think the statistic years ago was 70% or so of Canadians take a 5-year closed mortgage. And so, if you go back 5 years ago, go back 10 years ago, when they came up for renewal 5 years ago, they probably had a boatload of equity, and they refinanced, and they paid for their pool, and they paid for Bobby's university. And they got a great rate 5 years ago.
And they got a great rate. And now they're kind of up for renewal again, and they're thinking, you know what, this is great. We're going to do the same thing. And the landscape is very, very different. And so those transactions are making things much more challenging, I think, starting with the client and the broker and the lenders that are involved as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point and a very compelling one that, believe it or not, yeah, we've always, you and I have always seen people who have some problems that need to access private lending. But typically they were what you described. They were a lifestyle issue, they're a life issue, marriage, breakdown, some illness created some lack of earnings, and then they're back now, but their credit got a little touched up. And so there's all kinds of things. But to your point, today we hear more and more from people who are slightly behind on their mortgage payment, definitely behind on their car payment, and haven't paid property tax for 2 years. So it is much more like a bad economic story today that we see than we typically saw in the past. We saw decent economics for the last number of years, even COVID, once the government started handing out those $2,000 a month checks, I mean, things kind of healed up fast. But we are seeing today more troubling personal financial problems than we saw in the past. I think that's very fair and very accurate as to what's going on. So let's go a little bit into the nitty-gritty of private mortgages, because Derek is correct. We are seeing some odd behavior by private lenders. And we're also, and some of it's just odd because it's, I call it odd, but other people may call it malfeasance. And we're seeing the difficulty of no longer are house prices going up in Ontario. No longer are house prices going up in BC. In fact, in some regions, they're down quite a bit. Like if you bought a house in North Oshawa in 2021, I think you're out of the money. Like it's gone down substantially. Okay. And we all know the condo story. I won't beat the shit out of it. I'll come back and beat the shit out of it later. Like I plan on many, many more episodes about the condo crash, but we won't do it today. But that kind of combination of of a worse economic situation and a sort of a provincial and Canadian economic situation combined with this because Canadians since 1996 house prices have gone up. Fair?
Fair.
Okay. Maybe couple of blips in between. 2008 world financial crisis, a little bit of a blip only lasted 10 months, right? That was my observation of it. That's all it lasted. Was prices went off for 10 months, they were back.
Even the condo thing, I mean, you've been calling it for a while.
Yeah.
But you could argue that people who bought and flipped condos as, instead of putting money in my RSP, I'm going to buy and flip a condo. Like from say 2000 to 2020, they did well. Like they bought and sold.
Yes,
maybe they
well.
started. Maybe after 20. They bought in 2020. Or sorry, they bought in 2000. They flipped it in 2004,
2005,
and they said, you know what? Now I'm going to buy two because boy, I made money. I'm going to buy two, and my brother-in-law should buy two, and my neighbor should buy two, and so we all buy two. And then to 2008, maybe 2008, 2010, they made money again, and they said, wow, now we might buy four.
That's kind of accurate. Yes, absolutely.
And the realtor is saying, look, and they weren't wrong. Like that was a trend that I think a sophisticated investor would say you should never be buying, more that you can not rent out afterwards. Like what if? What if you're stuck with four? Will they carry? Because the ones you were buying for 200 or 300,000 are now 700 or 800,000, and at 200 or 300,000 you could rent it all day long, even if you can't flip it. But now
you could rent it successfully. You could cover your debts. You could cover all your payments. You would have a tiny bit of positive cash flow. You weren't in any jeopardy. It would all work.
And even if you're short, and you have to kick in $100 or $200 a month, but the plan is to keep the condo because eventually you're going to gift it to your kids, no problem. But when it shifted as fast as it did, I think that those people were all caught in that trajectory of constantly buying more and more, and no one was necessarily, I shouldn't say no one, but most weren't expecting the shift as hard as it was, and people had ignored that kind of, I need to make sure that it carries if I do wind up having to keep it.
Yeah, the story we did, I think yesterday, about the woman who paid she paid $1 million, and I think, can't remember, it was $20,000 or $30,000 for a 581 square foot condo. It's definitely not going to work. But really, it was never going to work. It was never going to be something we could get away with. It was just never going to work. But because you were always able to sell it in the past, you never bothered to do that calculation about the rents, about what would the rent need to be if I had to, the rent would need to be $9,000 a month for this 580. I don't think that's going to work. But nobody, to your point, nobody did it. They just didn't do it. But okay, but let's think about something that you mentioned earlier. So describe a bundled mortgage to people. What's a bundled mortgage? So if you found out that you needed to do something, you had a problem, your wife got laid off or your husband got laid off, and you have a bit of a problem now, and you're coming off a high mortgage rate because you renewed in 2023 and that was really high and that stretched you out, or you had one of those variables that stretched you out, variable mortgage stretched you out, and now the economics are not working for you, and you need to rejig your mortgage, and maybe your credit got a little harmed, your credit score got a little harmed by all the things that went on, and you turn to private lending. So some people will tell you need a bundle. So let's describe the bundle to us, Derek.
Yeah, sure. And so, it even kind of starts with where you get money. And so there's you could be borrowing money from your neighbor or a lawyer or someone, an individual. Then there's a group that would be called syndicated, which would be maybe like a group of people who are going to give you money. And then there's a MIC, like Westboro. And so you'd be borrowing money directly from us. And so when you're borrowing from a MIC, it's similar to a financial institution in that we have money ready to go. We have money, it's invested, there's investor dollars. We also have access to bank lines of credit. And so we have liquidity. We are able to give you the money and close within a few days. When you get into the world of syndicated, what can happen sometimes is they might go out to people who they know have money, but the money is not invested just yet. They might say, hey, would you like to invest in this mortgage? And the investor then might say, yeah, you know what? I would invest if the loan to value was as high as 60%, but I'm only going to give you money up to 60%. You're going to have to find someone else to do the rest.
So if the house is worth $1 million, this guy's willing to lend $600,000.
I'll give you 600.
Yeah.
But
no more.
The broker says, well, I need 800. I need 80%. And the guy says, no, I'll give you 60%. You can find someone else for the rest.
60% at X rate, X fee, right?
Right. And so then the broker says, well, okay, what do I do now? And it's actually not the broker. There are lenders that operate this way behind the scenes. And so they come out saying, I have a solution for you at 80%, but it is not the same as a Westboro or other MIC solution at 80%. They come out and say, we have a solution at 80%. What it is a bundle, meaning the guy at 60% or 600,000 is at X, and it's a different individual. And they're not friends. Like it's this person's going to do 60%.
They don't know each other.
They don't know each other. And the other person blindly comes in and says, you know what? I'm willing to take a bit more risk.
For a bit higher.
For a bit higher everything, rate, fee, all the rest of it. And now you've got your 80%. And so the lender comes back to the broker and says, okay, you have a commitment, you have a deal at 80%. And so if you had two and one was from Westboro and one was a bundle, it is a very different conversation that you have to have with the client explaining the commitment of each. Because there are many different pitfalls to the bundled one that when you've got a lender that can go all the way to 75 or 80%, you don't have to be as concerned with. And so the key ingredients to the bundle are you're dealing with at least two different investors. And so they may have different criteria on the way in. There's going to be double the fees on the way in. And the piece
there's going to be double the lawyers.
Double the lawyers.
Yep.
And one of the key ingredients, which I know we're going to talk about today, is that if you're working with any private, but in particular a bundle, but any private, you need to have a very clear and concise discussion with the client about an exit. And that clear and concise discussion about an exit is not a nice to do. It is a need to do. You've got to make sure. And in the bundle, my goodness, you better be sure that you're careful.
Also true. Our regulator, FSRA, tells us that nothing is as important to them as, in the case of private lending, which should never be a permanent solution. If you're looking at a situation where you think these people are going to have to do private lending for as long as they stay in the home, the correct advice you have to give is, no, you can't stay. You must sell, and maybe you should sell right now sooner than just keep. But yeah, our regulator is very clear about this. Mortgage brokers, it's not about, hey, I'm going to get you into this private mortgage. I'm going to deal with whatever problem you have today. And then a year from now, well, I guess you're fucked. I mean, that is not what our regulator says. Our regulator says you have to have a certainty. Are you going to sell the house? Are you just coming off an illness? Are you going to get your old job back? Like, explain to us exactly how this is going to work, and then have the client say, yes, I agree to all those points. I agree that I must sell. I will list in 6 months, blah, 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 and understand it. And boy, to Derek's point, particularly we're dealing with first and second mortgages or any private lending, this is not like a bank mortgage. Okay, bank mortgages all look about the same. I mean, they do. I mean, you and I have been in this business a long time. Royal Bank's mortgage looks a lot like TD's mortgage, looks a lot like Scotia's mortgage, looks like there might be really different rates and really different underwriting levels. Like, yeah, Scotia might give me 75%, this guy's 80, this guy's good with rentals, this guy doesn't want rentals. But in terms of the actual contract you're signing, there's a ton of similarities.
Yes.
But with private lending, good fucking luck. I mean, there could be a hey, if you miss a payment, it's not a $200 NSF fee, it's not a $75 NSF fee, it's a $750 NSF fee, and if you miss 2 payments, it's a $1,500 NSF fee. And you might be saying, Ron, that's impossible. That's got to be illegal. It actually may be illegal, but it's there anyway.
It's
and
there
anyway.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm suggesting, and that's not everybody, folks, but wow, there is. If you aren't reading every single word in that contract, you're making a mistake. I mean, there can be incredible. And the thing we've seen lately is, to Derek's point, we've seen situations where the one person who gave you the second mortgage, they want their money back.
Right.
Like the guy with the first mortgage is kind of okay. Like, you paid perfectly. I'm sort of okay. Value's down a bit, but I can still live with it. But that second mortgage guy said, give me the money. I want my money. And if you don't come up with the money, you got a hell of a problem. Like, your first mortgage guy is okay, but your second mortgage guy is out, and he will put you into legal action if you don't pay him off.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that people think, well, so long as I make all my payments, there won't be a problem. And that is the farthest thing from the truth.
So
because
far.
The guy in second, it's his money. Maybe he's decided that he has to close on a pre-construction condo that he bought
for $1,710 a foot. Yeah.
Or his kid's going to university and he needs the money. Whatever the reason is, they don't really have to disclose that to you. They've allowed within the contract for you to borrow their money for 12 months. At the 12-month mark, I want my money back. And it doesn't matter if your house value has gone up or down, and it doesn't matter if you made your payments. I want my money back. And, the storm gets created when property values are down quite significantly. The client can't necessarily qualify for the takeout. And the only solution by the second saying, I want my money back, is the sale of the property. And so when it comes to these bundled mortgages, I think that, brokers really need to take the time to understand. And quite frankly, bundled, not bundled, it doesn't matter which private lender you're dealing with. A detailed review of the commitment is critical for them to understand. And I always use the line, deal with lenders that like, and trust, because, there are a lot of great private lenders out there. And I think Westboro is one of them, obviously. Once you've dealt with Westboro and you've dealt with us on the way in, you've dealt with us on the way out, I kind of always say, you'll like us on the way in, you'll love us on the way out.
Yeah, you made a great. Was there a lender, you saw a contract where the lender said, if you don't give us full, formal, and acceptable notice 90 days prior to renewal, that you will be paying us off. If you miss by one day, like if you're day 91, you give us the notice. And by the way, this is 90 days before, or not 89, day 89. This is 90 days before the actual maturity date. If you don't give us formal notice of what you're going to do, that you're going to pay us off, if you wait till day 89 to give us formal notice, you owe us an extra $5,000.
Yep.
Jesus Christ, that's wild.
And it's just for sending the email.
That's for giving the notice.
Well, I mean, obviously we've got lots of broker friends, having been in the industry for as long as we have. And like the broker flipped at me. He's like, can they do this? And I read it and I'm like, yeah, it's right there. If obviously the client is now dealing with a different broker, because the broker that put them there is now the broker that's at fault, because they're going to say, why didn't you tell me? And the broker say, I didn't even notice that was buried in a commitment somewhere. And so ultimately I understand why the lender is doing it, because they're trying to manage their liquidity. But ultimately, there's got to be full transparency in going through that commitment step by step, line by line, making sure that if it's a variable rate mortgage, and you and I would both say, well, a variable rate mortgage goes up and down with prime, not in the private space. At Westboro, we only do fixed rate mortgages. In the variable space, there are private lenders who, when rates go up, your rate goes up. When rates go down, your rate doesn't go down. They created their own terminology of the variable mortgage. Yeah. Same thing with an open. Like a Westboro open mortgage is open, just like a bank open, where others will say, our closed term has a 6-month penalty and our open term has a 3-month penalty. And so these are things where if you're...
So that's barely open.
It's
if
barely
a penalty.
open.
That's got a weird kind of open mortgage if it's a penalty,
But
right?
if you're a banker by trade and you've grown up around these terms, you say, you know what? I know what an open mortgage is. I don't need to read the definition of that. But what you have to understand is in the private lending space, people can make their own definitions. And so long as they've been transparent with you in the commitment, you've got to have read that commitment from soup to nuts and been able to articulate it with super clarity to your client. And I love everything you talked about on the exit in terms of making sure the client is truly invested in what the exit's going to look like. And the other interesting part about talking about the exit is like the client's in a private mortgage, meaning that something has happened in their life to bring them down this path.
Bank. They're not at the bank,
right?
Yeah.
So can you definitively say then, as much as my world has kind of moved around on me unexpected, that I can definitively say that if I get a mortgage on June 1st of 2025, that I'm going to be out June 1st, 2026? I don't think so. And lenders know that. And so that's why there can be heavy penalties if you're not paid out right at the 1-year mark.
Because essentially it's a trap.
It can be.
So what percentage of your mortgages pay out precisely on the maturity date?
Maybe 30%.
So somebody needs the extension somewhere. Okay.
Yes.
So folks, here's the idea. These heavy duty fees on the back end are a trap that the private lender understood from the get-go. That's the truth. So, Derek, when we think about how the sort of Ontario and Canadian real estate and economic scenario is developing, what do you worry about? What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I think you'd assume I would say property values, but ultimately I would say it's the job market. I think that, we've seen so much change south of the border and now in Canada with the political landscape. And that's made employers pause, I think, in certain, like the auto market's a good example to talk about. Like they hear tariff and they freeze.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And all of a sudden, where 3 years ago you couldn't get a car, now there's fleets of them waiting for you there. And so they're saying we're not building anymore. It's probably because they don't need to, because they've got tons of them that they can't unload. And where it was 2 years ago where you were paying a premium to get like a pickup truck, now there's probably going to be back to the world where there are discounts. And so ultimately, and that's a big sector for Ontario, everything to do with the car market. And so ultimately it's the job market for me, that so long as that we get past some of these political kind of uncertainties, regardless of who's in office, if we can get past them and people can start to see a little calmer waters ahead, I think it'll allow employers to get back to manufacturing, back to hiring, and that creates stability right across the lending network.
Because if the mortgage was carefully thought out and to be reasonable protection to the investor, because we when you're in the private business, we're thinking two ways. We're thinking for the borrower, we're thinking for the investor. Mm-hmm. So if we thought the investor was adequately protected, the one thing we have to worry about is if the borrower loses their job, and then too many people lose their job, and too many people are feeling financial stress. And that does press down on values, but more to the point, it creates a collection problem, which none of us want. There's absolutely, and I echo what, and I know you do too, I echo what Nick Cipriano said last week. We do not want your house.
Yep.
None of us want your house. We just want you to find a solution or sell your house and that everything works out the way you planned and we're paid off. We do not want to be involved in collecting, your mortgage, putting it into collection, suing you, evicting you. We want no part of it. We hate it. Fair?
Fair. Listen, I'd say Nick's a beauty, first of all. And second of all, I totally echo his comments in that regard. Just no interest in, we want to help you for the short term. We're going to give you a contract, which I liked what Nick said. It's one of the oldest and most basic contracts that exist.
Absolutely. We're
going to give you money, you're going to pay us, and then you're going to give it back. And that's about it. And so any deviation from that is really not something that we're looking for.
No, it's really never a scheme for us to own your home. Never.
Okay.
Although some people, it's a scheme to really charge the shit out of you, okay, which in an unexpected way, which is bad. That's a bad part of private lending. But none of us want to. And yes, that key element of a bad economy, loss of jobs, reduction of hours, no more bonus, the effect of that on people's ability to pay is something that worries us all.
Yep.
And it is one of the things that every lender, it's like I've said many, many times on the show, every chief risk officer of a bank, the chief risk officer has three key things they worry about: unemployment, unemployment, and unemployment. Okay. Because nothing is as meaningful to a mortgage lender as people who simply can't pay. Like, Canadians will do anything they fucking can to pay their mortgage. They'll eat grass, drink rainwater, they'll let every other thing go, but they'll pay their mortgage. But if you don't work, or you don't get the hours you used to, and you just, in the very expensive, high unaffordability we have today, the mortgage eventually gets hit, and none of us want that. That's the truth.
And it becomes about advice. And I think, when things are going well, poor advice can sometimes be offset by a charging market.
Yep.
But in today's, and even back to in the last year or so, the advice that a client is getting from a mortgage broker is of utmost importance. And so if it's this idea that I'm going to sell my house down the road, I don't always disagree with that, because I think that if you had to have sold your house in, under 3 feet of snow in January of this year versus today, it may or may not be worth anymore, but you're probably more likely to sell it today than
you get a bigger audience. Yeah, right. For sure.
So I don't always disagree with I need a bit more time, but not at the expense of the exit, meaning that the exit will always be the sale. And so some of the mortgage solutions that kind of people have come up with, whether it be I'm going to lend you the money and enough to make the payments, those start to get really tricky. And people kind of think I'm going to sell the house. And then the next thing you know, a year goes by and they're saying, well, I need more time. And at that point, there isn't more time. And so I think that these conversations we're having with clients, the advice, the discussion are so important. And if you're deviating at all from what is a traditional mortgage, meaning we're going to give you money, one lender is going to give you money and you're going to make us principal, interest, and ideally property tax payments so we can keep you on track. And that way, a year from after having been with Westboro for a year and you've paid us principal, interest, and property taxes, if you like that bundled into your mortgage, I shouldn't say bundled, but added into your mortgage. Yep. That's a pretty strong, value proposition to take a private to an alt or an A, because you've proven that you've kept all those things on track. And that, for me, is deep rooted in giving a client good advice. Any deviation from that, you just start to wonder about, is this actually going to allow the client to continue on their journey and get the exit that they need?
Because the whole story of private lending, to say this to the audience, let's close on this idea. The whole idea of private lending, private mortgages, is about a temporary solution, not an eternal solution. Derek, thank you. It's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Love it. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Great.
If you like the pod, well, don't just sit there. Go to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the other ones and like the pod. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep being angry at mortgages and swearing about mortgages. Angry Mortgage could use your support.